No one could have predicted the quiet explosion of that night. At first, it seemed like an ordinary celebration. The spotlights hadn't yet come on, but the air inside was like a taut wire. Then, with silent steps and like a shadow, Cillian Murphy entered the stage. He wore a well-tailored yet unobtrusive dark blue suit. His hair was slick as back, his face expressionless, but his eyes sharp. The crowd may not have risen to their feet at the sight of him, but when the applause erupted, something strange happened. The energy of the room shifted. It was as if someone had glimpsed the reality behind the curtain. Cillian walked onto the stage as if he had stepped over the crowd, not through it. He didn't smile or bow. He simply sat down. And for a moment, silence enveloped the studio. When the cameras rolled, Jimmy Fallon entered with his usual broad smile. He was a master at drawing laughter, but this time his smiles felt forced. The night's guest was clearly different from the dynamics he was accustomed to. "Cillian," Fallon said, his voice drawn out. "You and Pedro Pascal in the same movie. Sounds dangerous, man. Should we be careful?" The crowd laughed. Fallon chuckled softly, but Cillian didn't respond. He just tilted his head and smiled briefly. His eyes met Fallon's, but there was no warmth there. He looked like he was deciphering a code. Fallon continued, as if trying to fill in the blank. "New movie, huh? Psychological thriller. Oscar rumors already starting." Cillian said briefly, "Yeah." His voice was cool but melodic. He seemed to have caught his breath before the sentence was finished. The first few minutes were surface level. There was talk of Pedro's fondness for sweets between sets. Light jokes, a few laughs, but something wasn't adding up. Jimmy realized he wasn't in control, so he went on the offensive. And then came the question. His tongue was soft, but his intent was sharp. This character, manipulative, cold, mysterious, he's really hiding deep down. Is it difficult to play someone like that? Or is it something personal? The studio fell silent. The audience wanted to laugh, but the timing was off. Cillian slowly raised his head. He locked eyes with Fallon. There was a 3-second pause, and then he spoke. "If you seek the origins of every dark character you imagine in the actor's inner world, maybe it's not me that scares you. Maybe it's the confrontation with yourself." His eyes weren't smiling. His face was calm, but his words were like a slap in the face. Fallon smiled, but this time the smile had slipped. They were in a moment when an ordinary interview was no longer ordinary. Fallon laughed briefly, but there was a tinge to it. Sure, he said, his voice curving with sarcasm. I wondered if there was a reason you played dark characters so naturally. Maybe it was something you felt." An awkward silence hung over the room. The audience was torn between laughter and silence. A few nervous sniffles were heard. Cillian didn't move, but he turned his gaze to Fallon. He looked, for a long time. Then, in a silence, he slowly straightened up. He didn't change his posture, but his presence suddenly grew. "Jimmy," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but the microphone stuck like a needle into the studio. "I think we were going to talk about the movie here. You should have brought another chair for our personal analysis session." Fallon grinned like someone still trying to look cheerful. "Just messing around. Don't be scary, huh?" he said, winking. And in that moment, the atmosphere changed completely. The lines on Cillian's face didn't move, but the smile was gone. There was only emptiness, a cold, measured, mathematical emptiness. His eyes turned to Fallon, but this time he wasn't just looking. He seemed to be ripping it off. "Fear," he said, "begins when you can't tell who's wearing which mask. But I'm not the one who's scared here, Jimmy." It was as if the power had gone out in the studio. The audience had their heads slightly bowed, some held their breath. Fallon was speechless for a moment. Then he tried to recover. The movie was beautifully shot, by the way. The camera angles, well, the cinematography was amazing. But it was too late. The moment had already been broken. Twitter was already on fire. Videos had already started surfacing on TikTok. But the conversation wasn't about Cillian's film. No, the same phrase was on everyone's lips. "Did you notice whose mask fell off?" One viewer wrote on Twitter, "Cillian Murphy managed to tear someone apart without a word, just with his eyes." He wasn't just on air at the time. He was playing a game of chess. And before Fallon knew it, the check had already been pulled. At that moment, the entire internet was talking about one thing. Was Cillian Murphy beating Jimmy Fallon in his own arena? The commercial break had passed, but the tension hadn't. The air in the studio had thickened, descending on the stage like a dense fog. When the cameras rolled again, Fallon was smiling as if nothing had happened. But that smile, it was like a mask forced onto the surface. His hands were clasped together under his desk. His fingertips were white. He pretended to pull himself together. "And here we are again," he said with forced energy. He cracked a small joke, but the audience's laughter was weak and fleeting. Cillian Murphy, however, remained where he was, upright, motionless, but present, like a patient lake. Not a flood, but a deepness swallowing you whole. Fallon cleared his throat. "So, Cillian," he said, "it was a bit of a lively conversation. Let's get back to the movie. Pedro Pascal always laughs during dramatic scenes. Is that true?" Cillian stared at him, motionless. He fell silent for a long time before speaking. Then he spoke. Pedro's laughter was meant to soften the darkness. "The film is about trauma. It's about wandering through the dark chambers of the human mind, not because it's entertaining, but because it makes it bearable." His voice was measured, but every word seemed to echo off the studio walls. Fallon leaned forward slightly. Her eyes were no longer playful but defensive. He continued, almost as if he were attacking. "You know, in a $1 million studio, in an expensive suit, it's easy to talk about darkness. So is playing the victim." A sudden gasp erupted from the audience. A woman's "ooh" was recorded, but Cillian didn't move. Without taking his gaze from Fallon, he replied, "And it's easy for someone hiding behind false cheerfulness, interrupting and mocking the guests, to present it as humor, rather than facing the truth." An unexpected applause erupted from the audience. There was no signal, no preparation. It was spontaneous, sincere, direct. Fallon's face began to droop. His eyelids fluttered. Cillian continued. His voice was steady, sharp, and clear. "Television doesn't make you untouchable, Jimmy. It doesn't make you immune to criticism. Humor only works when the guest laughs. Otherwise, it's not a conversation. It's a monologue. It's a game played on you, not with you." Fallon's smile had faded. He moved his lips as if to say something, but no words came. And in that moment, the audience had forgotten what was live. Because this was no longer a talk show. This was a teaching moment. Fallon tried to interject, her breath caught in her throat. "We're just having fun. That's all. It's the nature of the show." But her voice bounced back like a soft wall. Cillian leaned forward slightly. There was no anger in his eyes, but there was something there. Cold, deep, the face of truth staring into his eyes. "No, Jimmy," he said in a whisper. "This is your playground, and you get restless when someone else takes your toy." Fallon's eyes stared blankly for a moment. Then she shook her head slightly. "If you're trying to lecture me on this show..." Cillian didn't interrupt, but he responded with such sharp timing that the sentence froze in midair. "Lecture? No, I'm just answering. It's okay you can't hear the difference. You weren't asking a question anyway. You were trying to corner me. I just straightened up." The studio seemed tense at that moment. Hundreds of phones were held up. Some people had forgotten to breathe. Fallon's face tightened. The anger, disappointment, and confusion that had pent up inside him collided. Finally, he played his card. "Maybe you should just get up and leave." The sentence hung icy in the air. Cillian looked at him. For a long time, it was as if time had stopped. It was as if only two people remained in the room. There were no cameras. There was no audience. There was only silence. And within it, a solid answer. "Do you really want that title?" Fallon couldn't answer. The cameras flickered silently. Cillian turned his gaze to the audience. He spoke slowly, clearly, and gravely. "Gentlemen and ladies, this is what honesty looks like when it enters a scripted room." Then he stood, slowly. There was no rush. He straightened his jacket. He didn't look at Fallon again. He didn't turn back. He walked away, and he was gone. The silence in the studio didn't break even after the broadcast ended. Social media was already exploding. Within minutes, the hashtag Cillian Murphy was trending worldwide. One of the first comments on Twitter was, "Cillian Murphy turned Fallon's desk into a psychology lab." Someone on TikTok slowed down the entire scene and reposted it. Cillian crashed a talk show format without batting an eye. Another video caption read, "Jimmy, you poked the wrong person." Newspapers ran headlines. Murphy went silent, but everyone heard. Fallon's "just having fun" line was now circulating as an example of a man who doesn't understand the situation. Critics had been calling him harmless for years. Now another adjective was being used, humiliated. Cillian Murphy was given a new title, the face of silent resistance. And Pedro Pascal, he just shared a GIF, a man applauding for a long time on stage. Before sunrise, the internet was ablaze. But it wasn't just a broadcast anymore. Other guests began speaking out. Celebrities, artists, even former guests recalled similar behavior from Fallon's past. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Jimmy Fallon was no longer just a host having a bad night. He had become a symbol. He had become the voice of the system, smiling and condescending. Panic began at NBC. Sponsors began seeking support. Producers were called into a meeting. Fallon's team issued a barely written statement. Misunderstandings can happen on live television from time to time. We don't mean to offend anyone, but the public didn't buy it because they saw that evening wasn't just a moment, but a mirror. And the person holding up that mirror was Cillian Murphy. The next morning, Cillian's Instagram story blew everyone's minds. A white background, black text on it. There were no hashtags, no labels. It simply read, "Be careful who you force into silence. Some of us come prepared for silence." This sentence flooded the screens. It mingled with tweets, walls, and thoughts. It wasn't just a message, it was a challenge. That night, his movie broke pre-sales records. But more importantly, it won without selling out, posturing, or shouting. Fallon's ratings plummeted the following week. The scenery was quietly changed. The production team was partially replaced. The show's tone shifted slightly, but viewers noticed Jimmy's gaze now held a wariness. The words were chosen more carefully. Some said Cillian broke him, but others said it more accurately. Cillian just held a mirror up to him. And that night was unforgettable, because it's rare in television for the script to flip like this. And even rarer, when someone simply walks away with their own stance. Not for show, not for rebellion, for honor. That walk, that silent exit, it has now gone down as one of the most profound memories of late-night television. Because fame doesn't protect you from accountability, and charisma doesn't excuse arrogance. That night, silence wasn't a weakness, it was a spotlight. And this time, that spotlight was on the host. Cillian Murphy. He didn't just leave with respect. He walked away leaving a legacy. So what do you think? Was Cillian Murphy justified in his silence? Or did Jimmy Fallon overstep the mark? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to continue exploring the truths behind such unforgettable moments. This wasn't just an interview.